There are just too many video games to select from. You go to these great video game stores, you check out these awesome video game conventions, and it's overwhelming how many games are out there for all consoles. So in this video series I like to do, I'm going to give you one recommendation on 10 different consoles, so you got something to choose from. Or if you're just looking for great games that I think are pretty cool across the board, here are 10 recommendations I think you should check out. How are you feeling? You got John Riggs here. I love checking out video game stores and video game conventions, and I love checking out new games too. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'm kicking this video off with probably the best name for any video game of all time. Now, of course, admittedly, I had to check out this game because it's called Assault Rigs. My name's already in it. Well, it's missing a G, but still. This was an earlier release game for the PlayStation 1, and I still think it holds up today. I still think it's really fun. Now you gotta remember, when PS1 first came out, it wasn't dual analog. You still had a D-pad and your 4 buttons as well as your 4 shoulder buttons. You didn't have analog or anything like that, so it just worked and moved the best it could, and it still works and moves very, very well, I think. Simple idea, really. You play as a tank, you can pick up weapon upgrades, you have to collect the jewels along the way, defeat the enemies that happen to be in your way. These giant maze-like rooms are gonna be your each stage, and there's a ton of stages in this game. I don't know how many in total, but a lot and enough to keep you playing, no doubt indeed. The PlayStation 1 blew my mind a lot when it first came out, because I was so used to 3D being like Star Fox, or being like Mario Kart. And now that you can have like full world 3D, I mean, yeah, it looks pretty dated by today's standards, but man alive, I love this game. It's like I was actually in the tank, man. If you're looking for some PS1 games to check out, including the long box titles, you might want to check out Assault Rigs for the PS1. Moving on to the Sega Genesis, did you know that there was a Blaster Master 2? Yeah, they made a sequel to Blaster Master, one of the best NES games of all time. Now this game isn't exactly like Blaster Master 1, but it still holds its own in a lot of areas. Number 1 being the difficulty level. This game's a lot harder than it should be, in my opinion. Now the first one is pretty difficult too, but you can work your way through it. This one, oof. Maybe I just need to suck less, I don't know. And the other thing with this Blaster Master is you're going to spend most of your time in the tank, it seems. Now you can get out, and you can, climb down these ladders and stuff like that. But when you go into the rooms, instead of being the overworld exploration, it's like a 2D kind of side-scrolling-ish kind of thing. And not a whole lot of that to begin with. Yes, you do go in these rooms, yes, the graphics change and everything because now it shows you as bigger. But this is mostly where you do like some boss battles. So you just go in here and you defeat the enemies, and that's what, makes you find the weaponry or the key or whatever you need to, continue on through these stages. If you do miss that overworld element to Blaster Master, which was my favorite part of Blaster Master, really, well, you do an overworld tank area. So you're still in the tank, but then you're, it's overworld style. So you got that to look forward to as well, and that's basically the premise for all of the stages in this game, where you have your side-scrolling tank part, you get out of their tank, and you can go in the rooms to, find new items or to get the keys that you might need. And then you have this overworld tank part, and then it moves on to the next stage from there. Blaster Master 2, I mean, this was a later release Sega Genesis game. I believe it came out in 93, 94, somewhere in there. So a good, several years after Blaster Master 1 came out. And by this time, I think with Sega Genesis, more people kind of was like, hey, thank you, Genesis. I've had fun with you, and now, just kind of move on to the Super Nintendo, whatever the case is. This flies under the radar of a lot of people, not knowing that there was a Blaster Master 2. So had to show it off, and my pleasure to show it off. I think it's a fun game. If you're looking for a pretty fun Game Boy Advance game, one of my favorite games, I still play it today, is Fire Pro Wrestling. Now they have 2 of them on the Game Boy Advance. I might even recommend just the first one. Now if you're not completely familiar with the Fire Pro Wrestling series, it features wrestlers from around the world, and these are actual, well, hold on. They are actual wrestlers from around the world during the time this game was made, but their names have been changed, so it's not exactly them. But if you're familiar with the characters from New Japan, All Japan, Noah, for the time, at least overseas, then you'll recognize who these people are. And a few of them have wrestled in the United States as well. Now, there are a couple of US federations, the knockoff WWE and the knockoff WCW, And for these ones, they changed the colors and the outfits a little bit. Well, sometimes the outfits are the same, but they changed the colors. So again, with a keen eye, you can kind of tell who's who. Now, if you play the Japanese versions of these games, it is like the US color scheme. So if you want to play this on the import, play it as a Japanese version, that's fine. Just it won't be in English for you. And there's something about this pixel-based wrestling game that's existed for years. This series has been out for a long time. But it just played so well, even on the Game Boy Advance. It's not a button masher. You have to lock up, and then once you're locked up, as soon as you lock up, that's when you hit your button. Either your A or B button, or both buttons at the same time, and then one of the directions. And that'll do a different move for you. And you also have shoulder buttons too. One of them is to breathe, because you actually have to, breathe. If you don't breathe throughout the match, you get winded, and then you start, then you move slower, you're not as strong. Again, fun to see what moves they give them. They did their research on this game to find out, who's who and what's what, and, what kind of moves they do. So, a lot of effort to this game. You can make the opponents bleed. That's always kind of fun. And my favorite thing to do in any of the Fire Pro games is to do that critical. It's when you do a move that's so brutal that after a while, or depending on what kind of wrestler you're using, it just knocks them cold. Just knocks them stupid. And that's the best part. Now, although they do have different gameplay matchups, there's like one-on-one, there's a tournament mode, they have like death matches and stuff like that. The Battle Royal feature is my favorite part. I just do a Battle Royal and then just, beat up whoever happens to be in the ring. And you can either choose it to either, have it be, you have to pin them or make them submit, or you can throw them out of the ring. Not really over the top rope, just throw them out of the ring or roll them out of the ring, then they're eliminated. Fire Pro Wrestling for Game Boy Advance might be worth checking out. Oh, I've always got recommendations for NES games. Always got recommendations for NES games, and Air Fortress is a game I can't get enough of. It's an earlier game, it looks a little dated compared to most other NES games, but I just love this game so much. And super cheap to find too, so that's always a benefit. When you're looking for NES games, you're like, oh, that game looks fun, and you look it up, it's $100. That's not going to be the case with Air Fortress. I think you're going to have a fun time with this game. It starts out as a shooter, side-scrolling shooter, a shmup, if you will. Not a lot of enemies to shoot, you're more just collecting items and collecting things that you'll need for when you go into these air fortresses. Now when you land your ship and go down the elevator, now it turns into a different part of the game. This is your exploration mode. Now you do have an energy meter there, that's going to use when you shoot something or when you fly around, because you can also float. But in doing that, you're going to use up more energy. You need to reserve as much energy as you can, because some of these later levels are huge. The idea, as you're making your way through this, is to basically blow up the air fortress. So you got to find the core. When you find the core, you blow it up. You have these bombs that you can use, or you can just keep shooting at it. It's fine. It's not really going to attack you back or anything like that. And then once you do that, you have to find your ship and escape immediately. Now, this first stage is very simple, because your ship is right there. But there are some stages where your ship is far, far away, so you got to blow up the core, and then you're against the timer to find out where your ship is to get out of there safely and on time. Air Fortress from HAL Laboratories, believe it or not. The people who brought you Kirby brought you Air Fortress. You might want to check it out. And again, cost efficient. You're going to love it. Well, you've heard of Balloon Fight, but have you heard of Balloon Kid? Well, this is Balloon Fight for the Game Boy. This is Game Boy Classic. This is your black and white Game Boy. And this one features kind of an adventure mode. There's you have your kind of Balloon Fight style too, but this one features kind of a side-scrolling, well, you're flying the opposite direction, was kind of weird. But it gives you a different kind of gameplay with the same features as Balloon Fight, as you have your balloons and you're collecting the other balloons and you're avoiding the obstacles and all that. I like the fact that you can actually release your balloons. You can let them go and then just turn into like a, where you're running around and jumping around. And no worries, you can get your balloons back. You just have to, hit your button and you'll start pumping up your balloons again so you can start floating around again. A lot of similarities with Balloon Fight, and Balloon Kid, I think, is definitely worth checking out. Considering games for the Sega Master System, and I do love the Master System, I want to recommend Double Dragon on this one. And you're thinking, well, I already have Double Dragon, I've played Double Dragon, I have Double Dragon on NES. The NES version of Double Dragon is not the arcade version of Double Dragon. This one more resembles the arcade version of Double Dragon. I say resembles because, of course, it's not a one-to-one port. It's not exactly the same. but it's done very well. It's one of the better Double Dragon 1 ports, I think, is this one for the Sega Master System. I don't need to talk about Double Dragon a whole lot. I think it was one of the original side-scrolling beat-em-ups. It's one of the original games that looked like this. You know, maybe without Double Dragon, maybe we wouldn't have Final Fight. Maybe there never would have been a Streets of Rage. I don't know. We maybe never would have had TMNT the arcade game. I never thought about that. But either way you look at it, Double Dragon, it's a classic, very good, and plays extremely well on the Sega Master System. So if you have a Master System looking at building some games and you see Double Dragon, you're like, I don't need Double Dragon, I already got it for NES. Different style of game here. This one's more like the arcade version, and I love it for it. Well, I do love my puzzle games. Haven't really talked about one just yet, but we do have Wild Snake. This is for the Super Nintendo. Now, Wild Snake looks like Tetris. It looks like it's going to be another Tetris clone. Man, they've been doing Tetris clone ever since Tetris came out. We've had non-stop Tetris clones. And non-stop Tetris, too. This one plays a little bit differently. Yes, it's the same, you know, cylindrical, tall building style thing. Interesting enough, though, that when one snake touches another similar snake, the similar snake disappears and goes away. There's something, to me, oddly addicting about this game, and I don't know what it is. It's easy to just touch the other snake and, you know, make them nice and organized. The fun for me in this game, much like the Puyo games, is to stack it tall, see if I can stack it as high as I can, and then look for those combos. Look for those things where, well, that snake's eliminated, and then when the other snakes move into play, then it'll touch more snakes, and those snakes will be eliminated, and then that moves into play. You know, so things like that. It's just kind of fun to check out. Wild Snake is one of those games that you even saw on the rental shelf, and you're just like, no, I'm not renting that. But don't discount Wild Snake. I think it's a lot of fun. I am a huge TurboGrafx-16 fan and a huge Capcom arcade fan, and when Tiger Road was released and not on the NES, I was upset, but we got it on the TurboGrafx-16, good enough for me. And I'm sure the TurboGrafx-16 port of Tiger Road would have been better than the NES version. However, since you never got the NES version, and maybe you never saw this in the arcade, maybe you're not as familiar with it. Well, it's an awesome game. That's what I need to tell you about. Has kind of an Asian vibe to it, of course. Got some different weapons you can pick up and use as you need. And I don't know, it just, something about it, I think just the idea and the fun and the weaponry you can pick up and things like that, it just made it fun, and made it a fun game, and made it just fun to see and fun to play. I loved playing this in the arcade. We had it in our arcade when I was growing up. And if I wanted to play it at home, I'd play this version right here on the TurboGrafx-16, Tiger Road. Yeah, I definitely want to check it out. Well, we talked about Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. We could do a Game Boy Color game while we're at it, I suppose. When in doubt, Mr. Driller. When in doubt, Mr. Driller. Mr. Driller plays fanatically, awesomely, fantastically amazing on any console. Because of its simple gameplay, simple style, you could have made this for the Atari 2600 and it would have been just as fun of a game, in my opinion. I'm sure it would have worked, and maybe someone already did a homebrew, I don't know. Now, although I mostly play this game on the Dreamcast, the version on the Game Boy Color still plays very well, too. Now, Mr. Driller might remind you a little bit of Dig Dug. It's in the same Dig Dug universe, believe it or not. I believe this kid from Mr. Driller is actually the guy from Dig Dug's son, or something like that, as far as storyline goes. You're just working your way down. You can tell by the gameplay how to play this game if you've never played this game. You just gotta, you know, those things, the blocks, the bricks, will all dissipate when you touch them or when you drill on them, and with everything else falling on top of you, you gotta make sure you don't get crushed. And how far can you make it? Oh, this is a super fun game. Not everybody's collecting for Atari 2600, but some of these video game stores and some conventions, you'll see boxes of Atari games, and you're like, well, okay, I've seen Pac-Man, I've heard about E.T., there's Asteroids again, there's Space Invaders again, but sometimes you'll find some games like Oink. There's a game called Oink. Well, it's based on the Three Little Pigs. Makes sense. You have 3 lives in video games. Why not the 3 lives be the 3 little pigs? Well, in Oink, there is the Big Bad Wolf down below, and he's blowing the house down brick by brick. And you have a bunch of bricks that you have to keep laying in place while he is blowing this down. Now, you cannot work faster than the wolf. You think you can for a while, but it gets to a point where you just can't keep up. And eventually, it'll happen. Eventually, the wolf will start to attack you and get you, and that's when he starts sucking you in. And once he gets you, you move on from there to the next life. Fun is a one-player game, but man alive, is this a fantastic two-player game, because the second controller plays as the wolf. So that makes this the most fun, is to play this as a couch co-op two-player game. Of course it's couch co-op, it's Atari. Atari did not have the internet. Could you imagine the size of the modem the Atari would have if it was on the 2600? It would look like that Genesis thing where you actually have to lay the phone into the device. I don't know. But oink for the Atari 2600 is one I think you should check out. Anything from Activision for Atari 2600 is usually going to be a pretty good game. 10 different games for 10 different consoles. You can't go wrong. Again, I love checking out video game stores. I love checking out conventions. I do videos on both of them whenever I can, and I love doing this video series as well, just showcasing some pretty cool games. That's not the best, it's not the worst, but games that are worth playing. And if you happen to see them at one of these stores or conventions, it might be worth grabbing. Check out the previous one I did, and I'll see you real soon.